Okay, that actually went pretty smoothly. Welcome to the 10th episode of the StoryMode podcast, the show where I usually break everything in the intro and then like to talk about it. Welcome to everybody who's tuning in. My name's Greg. The internet knows me as Blind. This is my Twitch channel, and this is a little show where we essentially sit down and talk about one game that we played over the past month, generally with a heavy story element. This is a spoiler cast. If you've never listened to this show before, we are going to sit here and talk about everything to do with this game from end to end. So if you've never played Dinner Date before or you care about spoilers, turn off now. Yeah. And I'm joined with my co-host, Lewis. How you doing today, man?
I'm doing good. So I'm Lewis, also known as LRFLEW. And that's it.
Okay. And we are joined with our guest host, Thyeggman. How you doing today, man? What's up?
Doing pretty good. I am doing very well.
Swimming in the mountain of magic cards.
Yes, I have them all over my desk, and they're a big mess right now. I'm Eggman. I often frequent Blind's chat. I play a lot of board games as well as pinball. Participated in a tournament yesterday. It's actually being streamed on Twitch right now. But yeah, I also play video games. Otherwise, I wouldn't be on this podcast, right?
Yeah. Well, it's one thing we all have in common for the most part. So, real quick introduction. Today we're going to be talking about a little game called Dinner Date. This is a game that came out in 2011, I think? It's 2011 or 2010. It's been out for a while.
2010.
Got onto Steam back when Steam was really hard to get games on, so hats off to them for that. Real quick disclosure statement here. The creator of this game, Stout, thestoutgames.com, frequents my chat, so we all kind of know him. We're not going to be nice to it, though. So there's that as well. This isn't a review show, really. It's more of a discussion show. So we're not going to put a score on this or anything. We're just going to sit here and talk for about an hour about what we thought of the game. So, Dinner Date. This is a weird one. That's kind of all I really have to say. It almost feels like trying to be like a Heavy Rain or a Telltale game or something like that, but more from the subconscious rather than these are a bunch of characters you can see and you get to control their decisions. It's like you are a character and you have to control his slight movements and fidgetiness as he slowly descends into madness while getting drunk.
They make it.
Oh, go on.
The Stout makes a point at the beginning of the game of specifying that you're not the character, you are the subconscious of the character, which I'm not sure is completely accurate, but it does convey the idea that you, and you'll see this throughout the game, that you don't have control over what the character actually does, just kind of like these subtle movements and things that they do.
You can make his hand twitch, you can make him glance over at the clock, you can make him pick up food. I think that's like the most direct control you have is you can make him eat.
Yeah. You have more influence over what he does instead of control over what he does.
Yeah. And then he just has his thoughts and goes through a very, very, very short story about waiting for a date and the date not showing up. It's kind of depressing, actually. He's in the story, he states that he's trying to get on with his life and it's not working, and he was just hoping that he could have this for this like one nice day, and it just doesn't work out. I don't know. I honestly don't know what to say about this game because it's such a simple story. I can give you a synopsis in about like 5 seconds. It's basically he's waiting for his date. Date doesn't show up, and then he thinks the date shows up, and it's just the neighbors. He goes and he smokes for a bit, and then he goes off and hangs out with his friends and goes drinking. I think
he drinks like the entire thing.
Well, he has 2 glasses of wine.
3 glasses.
3? Was it 3? Oh, okay.
I thought there was implication that he actually got through multiple bottles or something.
Well, he's drinking the same bottle the whole time, and you can actually see between the different chapters that it goes down. He finishes about 2/3 or 3/4 of a bottle, so that's a pretty hefty amount.
He does black out a couple times. To me, it almost feels like the in between the chapters section is blacking out. I don't know. To me, it was just, how do I explain this? It was a very interesting idea executed poorly.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to take a moment real quick that this is primarily a story,
Go ahead.
discussion. But I want to take a real quick dive into the mechanics. So, like, the basic idea is that there'll be like little bubbles that appear on the screen and it has a letter on it. So you press that key, and it performs some action based on where that bubble is located, basically, right?
Once you get used to the bubble, and also there's a little picture on the bubble of what your character's going to do. So if it's a picture of his hand, he's going to move his hand. If it's a picture of the wine bottle, he's going to reach for the wine bottle. If it's a picture of the soup, he's going to go for the soup.
Yeah. And the idea being that that's supposed to be sort of an indirect control, that the idea is you're the character's subconscious, not necessarily controlling it. But I felt like it kind of missed the mark if that was its goal. If you're not necessarily controlling him, then why does he basically do nothing without your input? Why are the animations so repetitive? And it feels very canned that, you hit a certain button and it goes through the same animation every single time.
Yeah.
And why, if you're just as subconscious, does it take 3 button presses to eat a spoonful of soup?
I will point out that I did try this. You can actually just sit there, not do anything, and eventually he'll go through some of the like main actions. Like if you're sitting there when he's smoking a cigarette and don't press any buttons for a while, he'll smoke the cigarette on his own.
Yeah.
But yeah, for the most part, this is kind of a complaint I have about the game. Not all the actions that you're doing are subconscious. Like it's a conscious action to like eat bread, eat soup, drink wine, right?
Yeah.
I've had trouble drinking or eating soup while drinking. Just saying. I think to me, this, take the whole game out of Dinner Date. Okay. It's a very, very interesting look at a person's head while they are convincing themselves to drink more. That's what the game was for me. Like the whole notion of, oh, she'll get here, don't worry, she'll be here, and then, oh, I'll have a glass of wine just to like wait, and then, oh, I'll just start eating because it's been an hour, and then, oh, I'll just keep drinking, and then it's interesting looking at someone's psyche like that, having been in that situation before. I think it's interesting to see it portrayed in a game form. I mean, at the same time, I think it's really hard to call this a game in many ways, considering how indirect your control is.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the thing about it. Like, we can talk about taking the game out of it, and I think we will in a moment, but this really doesn't have a mechanic. I mean, I know you didn't like To the Moon because a lot of the mechanics just sort of didn't, you had trouble with the mechanics, but that really did feel like there was a game to tell that story, whereas this one feels like there's a story and it's trying to be a game.
Yeah.
And it kind of fails. I mean, it's better if you try to think of it like a visual novel, but even then,
It's not like like a visual novel insofar that there's multiple routes that your actions could
Yeah.
take. Like you can press the buttons in a different order, but it doesn't change the outcome of of the evening, right?
Isn't there a term for a static visual novel, or a visual novel that doesn't change? Can't remember the name of that off the top of my head.
A walking
that's just
simulator.
not a visual novel.
Dear Esther. Wait, actually, no, that changes.
I've never played the game. I just heard all the controversy surrounding it.
It's not worth the controversy.
Okay.
How do I explain this? I have a thought in my head that I'm trying to get out. It's not working. Somebody cover for me.
Kind of the conclusion of this discussion was that the mechanics really aren't worth anything to call home about. But that leaves kind of the story. And that sort of leaves us into the discussion of the story.
I mean, we've talked about games before that put plot above mechanics.
Yeah, but nothing to the point where there basically are no meaningful mechanics.
It's not like you can just, yeah, like Flew said, it's not like you can just decide, oh, I don't really want my character to drink. I want him to be, like on top of his game when Micah, his date for the night, arrives. It's not, you can't do that. It's like you sit there and stare at the. I didn't wait when you had the option to drink the wine, but I assume if you sat there for long enough, it would just force you to drink the wine anyways.
Eventually, because that's actually what I did the first time. If you don't allow your character to drink the wine, eventually you will only have that prompt. That'll be the only prompt left. You'll go through everything else, and he'll just sit there, kind of breathing, and then eventually it'll just be like, yeah, I'll have a glass of wine. So it is like we've looked at the script. We pulled it out of the game files. Like you can see there's only one route. I think that it would have been a much more interesting game if there was multiple routes, but I think what we should be talking about isn't what this game could have been. Let's just talk about what
I'm
the
not
game
even
is,
talking about
really.
multiple routes. I'm just saying there's not really any meaningful interactions you can have with the game other than experiencing the story.
This had about as much interaction as a Metal Gear Solid cutscene.
Yeah.
Those cutscenes where it's like
any Metal Gear games, so
Okay. Neither have I, but I did sit in a room with a friend of mine while he was playing Metal Gear Solid 4. And I say playing, we watched an hour and a half long cutscene. Or it felt like that. Anyways, we basically just were sitting there, and the only interaction he had was he could move the camera around.
Mhm.
And I almost feel like this was about the same amount of interaction.
Yeah, because some of the buttons that you can press, just like your character turns to look at different parts of the room. Like sometimes you're looking at the table, looking straight ahead, looking over at the counter, looking at the window.
I always made a habit of looking at the clock every time I skipped forward a chapter to see how long it had been, which was always interesting.
Hmm.
I don't know. I think I'm trying to think of good things to say about Dinner Date. I do really like the idea that this game was going for. Let's take a look at the psyche of a man fidgeting, being nervous, and then eventually giving up and kind of giving into depression. I think that's it's a really interesting piece of interactive media, if nothing else. Like, I would hesitate to call it a game. I mean, sure, technically it is, I guess. But it's definitely falls under experience and thing that you just watch almost. Like, to the point where Stout he actually mentioned in my chat once that he was almost not okay with people making videos on YouTube of his game, because what's the point of playing the game after you've watched a video of it?
Yeah.
I think what it's trying to go for is total immersion. So if you can just completely immerse yourself in the subconscious of this character's head, you can just kind of listen to him think and maybe almost become that person, I think is what it's trying to do. But it falls short when there isn't enough different animations that you can watch your character do. I ended up doing this like
That,
8 times.
I could not stand watching that. Like, I mean, one of the problems with the animation is that it was always kind of a little too moving. It was moving a little too much. Like, you couldn't really have the head ever stay stable. It was always moving in a very distracting way, and half of those options were really distracting. The stretching was very visually distracting. I think in the end, I was trying to figure out why I really didn't like this game, and there kind of were 3 things that came out of it. One was, if the dialogue is supposed to be what's important, the game does way too much to distract you from it. There's different animations, and more importantly, I'd realized the music was just a little too loud. I couldn't really clearly hear the voice. I went to the settings to turn on the music, no audio settings. There's like no settings really in there. There's no FOV.
There's a master volume setting, but it doesn't let you change it
Yeah,
individually.
you need to be able to turn the voices up. I ran into that as well.
Yeah. And there just weren't enough options to really make it user-friendly.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, for the length of game this is, and for the content of dialogue, I think that you the characterization of Julian, of Micah, and of his coworkers is actually fairly good, because you get this idea, like you kind of see multiple perspectives as he gets more drunk through the night. Like at first, he's kind of thankful that he has these coworkers, that they're inviting him out to go party or to drink, and that one of them got him set up with Micah. And after a drink, he's kind of like frustrated with where he is at work, and kind of upset at some of his coworkers, and like, why isn't this person been fired yet? And after the third drink, he's just like, fuck all this, fuck everybody, I care about myself.
I'm gonna go drink more.
I'm looking at Micah as a sex object now instead of as a human being. It just kind of goes off the rails. But in doing that, you see like his, I guess this is subconscious coming into his subconscious thoughts as he gets a little bit looser in his thoughts. So that's pretty good in my opinion.
Like I'm looking at the script right now. Yeah, I'm picking myself up here. Some soup might be nice. He's talking about like getting food at this point. I'm just scrolling down a little bit more. Yeah, no, it's interesting because he's when he's just as I said before, as like a description of like a descent into madness as things get worse. It's very interesting as a character showpiece. I actually agree. I think he did a good job. You just worded it better than me.
It's an interesting dive
boil
into
this thought.
I really didn't kind of feel like I understood it until I went and actually read the transcript files from the game, because it's so hard to focus in the game. But reading through it does seem kind of good in terms of the overall story arc. But kind of leads to my main point about this, which is, the story arc, the general idea, it's good, but the writing itself just kind of isn't.
I think where it fell off for me was actually the voice acting.
And that's definitely part of it, but the writing itself has some issues. I mean, I understand that Stout doesn't speak English as a first language, I believe. And that can definitely have an effect on it, but it's just sort of like little things that are kind of fundamental to good writing that just isn't here.
I think he does speak English as a first language, but
I mean, like, when I first played through the game and I got to the very end and I was trying to figure out why I didn't like it, the first thing that came to my head was this kind of failed at the first rule of writing, which is show, don't tell. And I'm not talking about visually showing. I don't necessarily care that the entire story took place inside of his apartment. I'm more talking about the writing itself. It kind of is very just explanatory. It just says stuff. Looking through the script, I'm getting quite hungry.
it almost feels like he's trying.
Am I just now eating bread by myself here? What did Brian write? It's all just these sort of like statements. He did this, she did this, and there's not a lot of this is how it really made me feel. This is my reaction to all of this. It kind of fell flat.
I mean, don't you have these same sorts of thoughts though when you're just doing everyday mundane things? Like, it, to be fair, that night would have been less everyday and mundane if his date had shown up, but like, since she didn't, all these things are just kind of commonplace, and now he's just kind of twiddling his thumbs. Like, when you're kind of trying to burn time, I guess, don't you think some of the same things?
I mean, maybe, but I want to pick out a word that you just said there, mundane. I mean, I'm not picking up a game to play because I want a mundane experience.
Fair enough. I think that's perfectly acceptable. It's just that's, I think, what a lot of the intent of making the game this way was, and so yeah, I guess it is what it is. And if and I guess it wasn't terribly intriguing to me either. It was mundane, but maybe that's what he was going for.
Maybe, but going for boring doesn't necessarily mean that boring becomes good.
Mundane
That
and
makes sense.
boring are different things, though. I would argue. Mundane is just the everyday things that you're used to, like almost procedural. Boring means that. How do I explain boring? Boring is like uninteresting. I think that you can have a mundane thing that's still very interesting. If that makes sense.
I mean, yeah, but you have to be very, very carefully crafted to make that work, and this just wasn't crafted well enough to do that.
I'll also give the example of a very popular genre of anime is slice of life anime, which is
Swimming
by
in the
definition
mundane.
mundane, but there's some really intriguing storylines that you can make happen here. I don't think the story was long enough to develop a storyline that is intriguing enough to warrant like the cost of the game, I guess. I think it should have probably been
I got it for
a dollar or two.
I got it for 99 cents on Steam sale.
Okay, Steam sale, sure. I paid full price. Well, I assume full price for it. It didn't look like it had a sale when I bought it. So
I actually remember the day this game came out on Steam because I've been obsessively looking at new releases on Steam since I first installed Steam. And it was $5 when it first came out. So it's basically
it's $4 now.
It was $4.99 when I first saw it. It's $5.49 in Canada. So
Okay, it's $4 US. Actually, no, is it 5? Was it $4.99? No, it was $3.99.
okay. Yeah, no, I think it's an interesting little experience. I really like what he's going for. I wish it had a little bit more to it, you know? Maybe even just better production value, you know? Because I really like what he's trying to say here. Just the concept of a character study experience isn't something I've played before, so that's new and it's interesting and it's weird. You know what I mean? Like with the exception
Yeah.
of maybe a with the exception of maybe a visual novel, you don't really have experiences like this except outside maybe Heavy Rain and Telltale stuff. But even Telltale is very different. I think the closest thing to this that I could compare it to would be Heavy Rain. But again, you're not really controlling the subconscious of a character. You're straight up, you have direct control. It's just a long QuickTime event. This is kind of different than that.
I'd like to think of this game as like, or compare it to the beginner's guide. Like, compare it to one of the individual small game snippets that we see in the beginner's guide. It's not really. I mean,
Yeah,
this game
actually.
is complete, but like if you take one of the individual games in the beginner's guide, which for the quick description of this, it's a bunch of little mini games that is narrated by a guy who had a friend who made these mini games and never released them. He piled them all together, or at least
Yeah, episode 1 of the Story Mode podcast, basically.
Yes,
Yeah.
if you want to go hear more about it, go listen to episode 1. It was pretty good. And the mini games don't really have often don't have a story in and of themselves, but they have like little mechanics. You're walking around, sometimes you're interacting, but yeah, it's like that, but a little bit more deep and fleshed out than the game snippets in the beginner's guide were, I guess.
Yeah. I want to make a very different comparison. Like we're talking about, comparing it against a visual novel and comparing it against the beginner's guide. One thing I kind of came up with when I was trying to figure out how best to explain why it didn't seem to work for me was I started thinking about plays and like small production plays, right? So I'm not talking about going to Broadway. I'm talking about going to your local theater where it's kind of a lower budget. They maybe only have enough, set dressing to really create one setting. And they have to create a story that exists in that one setting, which is very similar to this one. It was kind of a low production value. They really only had the one setting, and they have to tell a story in it. And I just recently saw a play kind of like that. And yeah, it had a bigger cast. The play had about 5 people compared to the one character in, this game. But it told a much better story because it really had an arc. There was a very distinct beginning, middle, and end. Whereas with this one, I mean, there is sort of this progression with the character as he gets more drunk, but there's no arc. He doesn't really learn anything. He doesn't, you know.
But he's not learning anything. It's you learning about the character.
But that's still just Act 1. Act 1 is learning about the character, and then, you know, Act 2, something happens, and
I agree with Flew here. I guess.
I mean, I'm not asking for a full-fledged hero's journey.
It does kind of feel like episode 1.
Yeah.
I think it would have been cool if, now that I think of it, to have an Act 2 and to continue to only hear the inner monologue of the character as he's going to hang out with his friends, for example, and he might be talking and doing whatever with them, but he's still, we only still hear his inner monologue and kind of can control him the same way. I think it would have made it a more intriguing experience that way. And then you could even like do the full 3 acts. He's out and then he comes back at night, and then like as he's falling asleep, like what is he thinking about his life at this point, and so on. It would be an interesting thing to see completed, I guess, if that were in the cards for the developer, Stout.
I mean, again, we're speculating. I have a problem with doing this on what it could be theoretically. But do you guys think that as the character study of someone who probably has some depression issues, having not the best time at self-confidence, that's actually a really good way of putting it, self-confidence issues with people that they know in reality, and that only really comes out when they're intoxicated, I think that's a really interesting look at a vulnerable person. And that isn't something you can really get in most forms of gameplay. Because in video games, you're playing pants in most cases. You are playing a shell that you control through a world to see things in the world. Even if they try and give that character a personality and a goal, a mission, even if they try and give that character a story arc, you're still just playing pants. I think by taking that control away from you and having you just kind of interact with the character as the character goes through the world, I think that's just a really interesting concept for game design. And I would like to see that expanded upon. You know what I mean? Does that make any sense?
I actually like that analysis a lot. It's not like you really don't get this experience in other games, and maybe there's a reason for that, because like all of us kind of have a negative opinion of the game, right? Maybe this is just not meant to
be fun.
It's I guess, yeah. I mean, one of the tags on Steam that you can see is experimental. Definitely experimental. It's not a game in even as much of a sense as
like 30 Flights of Loving was.
I don't know of a game that has actually been talked about on story mode that I can compare it to, but I did play through Cibele, which
Sybil.
was sure.
That's how the creator pronounced it in a podcast I listened to ages ago. So
yeah, and that certainly is a game
that I need to play. That I need to play at some point.
Yeah, I would consider my estimation of Dinner Date much higher than Sybil. It just is not that game. But that's a story. That's a discussion for another time, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know. I think doing subconscious narrative is really difficult in the game. Sorry.
Yeah, it is. But I was actually going to kind of more comment on your analysis of the game, which was kind of an exploration of how, getting drunk was basically bringing out the character. But looking over the script, I almost feel like that doesn't happen. I mean, just looking at what happens before you take a first sip of the drink, he's already still talking about like, this is my only chance I had as well, never meeting people like that. Jerry was right. I should be happy. At least he is looking out for my sex life. It's like, that doesn't seem to contrast very heavily with what he talks about later.
And I think it's almost more tone of voice and almost his, not his mannerisms, but as he's getting drunk, he does get a little bit more exaggerated in his movements. And I think if you listen to his tone of voice and the voice acting, the beginning when he, as you said, yeah, oh, well, Jerry's looking out for me. Later on, he's like, are they even looking out for me? Like, was she kissing the other two guys as well? Right? Like, he goes from being super happy about his friends to seeming to like them less and less as the plot progresses, which I personally find very interesting. I don't know.
So this guy, in the course of the evening, kind of is quoting some poems to himself, and I think that's a very like something a romantic would do, and I think that could have colored his like estimation of what the night was going to be like early on. If you don't mind, I'd like to read one of those just to kind of give you an idea of. Both of the poems are similar, but this is one. He quotes Lord Byron, and this is just what I found online. And this is in the year. Okay, that's not a year, but it's from the first canto of Don Juan. And so the poem is this. She ceased and turned upon her pillow, pale. She lay, her dark eyes flashing through their tears, like the skies that rain and lighten as a veil, waved and o'ershattering her wan cheek, appears her streaming hair. The black curls strive but fail to hide the glossy shoulder, which uprears its snow through all. Her soft lips lie apart, and louder than her breathing beats her heart. And I think that the character probably spent a good amount of time, like, he got hooked up with Micah through his coworker Jerry, and he's like, oh man, I want to impress her. I'm going to look up all these poems and stuff. And so I thought that was interesting. We never hear the whole poem in the game, but
I see it cuts off after the black curls.
Yes. But I thought it was an interesting look at what the character is thinking of in those situations.
I think that's almost just more character coloring, coloring out a character. Like it, for example, if I were supposed to take somebody out for a date, the first thing I would definitely not look up poetry. That's just not something that would even dawn on me. And I think it takes a specific kind of person to go do something like that. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I also
You'd have
didn't
to
get
definitely be an academic to go do that. Go on, sorry.
I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I was going to say that I didn't really get the feeling that this poetry was specifically for her. In fact, looking through the script, I see the exact line, I never get to read my poetry with all the going out or to bike or really to advance my career. Which sort of suggests that, he's starting to resent his friends for pulling him away from his passions, which included poetry.
Yeah, like as I said, to me it seemed almost more like coloring out the character a little bit. So I don't know. I've mostly said my piece on this. I think. I think the one thing that this game leaves me with is wanting more, if that makes sense. Like I feel like it cut off too early, whether that was a time, a budget, or if that's just all he wanted to do with it. I kind of think it's a shame we didn't see just. I mean, outstaying its welcome would be a very real thing, but I think that even if we had like a Star Wars style text roll at the end, that would have been interesting. And I think it was just, I think it ended too quickly. I think it needed a little bit more to flesh out the end of the story earlier, as Lewis was saying earlier about how it feels like Act 1.
Yeah. I mean, I can understand that feeling, and definitely, I was talking about it definitely leads to that kind of idea. But when I finished the game, I didn't think, oh, I wish there was more. I was more thinking, oh, glad I'm finally through this. Because, I don't know, it never really engaged me. And I guess that's probably the biggest flaw of the game for me.
I got very sunk into the music and the not atmosphere really, but just kind of his mutterings, and I found it interesting to listen to. And I could have listened to his mutterings for another 20 minutes if he kept muttering. So
I mean, between the music, the dialogue, the captions, which I was also looking at, and the button prompts and the animations, I could never focus on one well enough to really get an experience. I felt like getting distracted and didn't really have a good grasp of the narrative, good grasp of the music or anything.
I'd like to point out one more piece of set dressing that Stout did in this, and I put the link in chat. There's actually a comic that he has put on his fridge, which makes me think that the character has a lot of regrets in his life. It's basically it's a comic with a bunch of dinosaurs in it, and they're talking about how
Dinosaur comics.
Yes,
I
I didn't know this was a thing, I guess, but sure. And they're talking about how
This looks like it was drawn in paint.
yeah,
like
for sure.
really good paint. Okay,
Yeah,
sorry.
and it's this dinosaur talking about just like making parts of his life non-canon if they upset him or embarrassed him or he didn't like them. And he's just like making up his own magical world where everything goes, where the only things that happen to him are the things that he wants to happen to him, basically. And so I wonder if Julian is going to say, "Oh, wake up in the morning. Yesterday was not canon."
That did not happen.
Didn't happen.
That's usually how I feel after I've been out drinking.
I mean, that's kind of what will happen. He'll wake up, he'll, go to work, and his life will move on. Basically, that's kind of what I got from it.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that I just want to see what he does next. I think it was a really interesting thing. I've never seen anything like it before.
You're saying what Stout does next,
Yeah.
not the character in the game, right?
What Stout does next as a developer, because it's a really neat idea. Whether it was limited time, limited budget, like it's all running in its own engine. It's not like it's running in Unity or something. He made the thing completely from scratch, which I think is just, I don't know.
He did?
Yeah, it's
I did notice that, there are some games, like I was playing, I think, Firewatch, trying to play it on my laptop, and I couldn't even get 15 FPS on text. And then this game, I was able to turn on 4x multi-sampling and have it run perfectly fine on my toaster of a laptop.
yeah. I mean, I don't know. I want to see what Stout Games puts out next, because whether Dinner Date was a success or not, it's got me, and I want to see more.
I mean, I want to see what he has next, partly because I think he's an interesting guy and I think he can do some really interesting work, but probably my biggest problem with this game was the writing, and if he can't improve the writing, I don't know if I'll like any future games.
Do you have any final thoughts, Thyeggman?
I guess I'm not. If he comes out with another game, I'd gladly take a glance at it. But unless I'm doing something like this podcast, for example, I probably won't go out of my way to be like looking forward to like, oh my gosh, I can't believe Stout released another game. Let's go buy it immediately. That's not going to be my reaction to it.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I'm just a little bit obsessive over weird little things, you know what I mean? I don't know.
Yeah.
As far as games go.
Yeah. Little
Perfectly acceptable.
tiny little compact narrative experiences are something I've just had a soft spot for a very long time. And it's just fun to sit down and talk about them. So yeah. No, I think this was pretty good. Are we all done here for the most part? Does anybody else have
Probably.
anything they
I
want
don't
to
have
say?
any other comments.
I mean, to be fair, it was a really short game, so a little bit of a shorter episode, but yeah, I guess we're just gonna do final closing up here. So, Eggman, do you have anything you want to talk about? Anything going on in the real world, or anything that you want to say as closure?
Sure, a few things, I guess.
You're now a competitive pinball player.
I guess I've been a competitive pinball player for a while. If you're interested in seeing the finals of the tournament that I participated in yesterday, it's streaming over at twitch.tv/KevinDDR. So there's some really talented pinball players there. The player who qualified first yesterday was a 13 or 14-year-old. I don't really know. He was very young. Very impressive work. Other thing that I'm trying to work on, but also trying to find the time, is that I contribute irregularly to OpenRCT, and I'm currently trying to implement a big stats page that just tells you lifetime stats for the game. It's
I would kill to see my lifetime stats, but that's never gonna happen.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully, once I release it, you'll be able to see your lifetime stats starting from whenever that time is, which might be a while. There's some... Anyways, hopefully you'll have that to look forward to in future versions of OpenRCT. Otherwise, yeah, that's it for me.
And Lewis, do you have anything you want to talk about before we head out?
Not much. I mean, I could always say check out OpenMC2. I'm currently trying to find time to work on that again.
You're trying to port Midnight Club 2. More or less.
Yep.
Or fix the port.
Engine rewrite, basically. Yeah.
Well, anything else you got going on, or is it just that?
Um,
He does have a Twitter, he just doesn't ever
yeah.
post on it.
Go ahead. You know, if you want to follow me somewhere, I may occasionally stream on Twitch here. So twitch.tv/LRFLEW. Maybe if Grutonium and I ever actually get our schedule synchronized, we'll do the multiplayer Midnight Club 2 stream.
Yeah, and then I stream management games here 6 days a week. So follow this Twitch channel. You'll see a lot of management games. If you want to see more information on the podcast or previous episodes, you can go to, is it projectstorymode.com? Yes, projectstorymode.com. We also now have a Steam curator, which is actually kind of interesting. So if there's anybody in the chat right now watching live, I'm going to drop a link to this in the chat. We have a Steam curator that lists all of the games we've covered up till now. So if you just chill out on what's the word, Steam a lot, and you're flying around random games, you might just see our icon saying covered by this podcast, and it'll take you directly to the episode on SoundCloud that game was covered in. So if that's something that you're interested in, if people still actually use Steam curators, I don't know, I thought it was fun, and it doesn't take me a lot of time to upkeep. You can follow the show on Twitter at Real Story Mode. You can follow me on Twitter at BlindIRL. And yeah, I think this episode's gone pretty well. And thank you very much to everybody who tuned in today. And yeah.
Cool.
Sirens. People are
did it.
dying.
Yes.
We're still alive. No one's... Like, the train hasn't crashed
those would be
yet.
sirens outside my apartment.
So are we going to crash the train now? Awkward wave. Goodbye. See you guys later. And
Bye.
tune in next month for another episode of this crap. Bye.